After almost 3 decades since Pixar released their first feature animated film Toy Story, the studio earned its reputation of being one of the best animation studios on the planet. Pixar already released 27 full-length movies and a lot of short films as well. Many of them received rightful praise from general audiences and critics alike. The Pixar logo has been a sign of quality for many people for many years. Pixar is a studio that revolutionized computer animation, moved the boundaries of storytelling to the new frontiers, and started a whole new chapter in the history of animation. Let us dive into the history of Pixar, explore the origins of the studio, artists behind the stories, and how Pixar became what it is today. This is a very brief history of Pixar Animation Studios. We need to start in 1974. It was the year when a man named Alexander Schur, an entrepreneur and founder of New York Institute of Technology, started the Computer Graphics Lab. The lab played a significant role in the development of computer animation, which was still in its embryo in the 1970s. Schur had a bold aspiration to create the first full-length computer animated film. Nobody before him ever attempted anything like this. Schur hired notorious young computer scientists such as Edwin Catmull and Elway Ray Smith, who shared Schur's dream. Catmull wished to become an animator from childhood when he was mesmerized by Disney's Pinocchio and Peter Pan. He graduated from high school in Salt Lake City, Utah. There weren't any animation schools around, and since Catmull also had keen interest in mathematics and physics, he chose to study computer science at the University of Utah. In 1972, Catmull and his academic colleague Fred Park created a short film called A Computer Animated Hand. It was the first polygonal 3D animation. Catmull created a model of his own left hand. Triangles and polygons were drawn on its surface. The model was digitalized and animated. The short sequence was so impressive that the animation was used in the 1976 sci-fi film Future World. Despite a promising start, the computer graphics lab endeavor pretty much failed due to Schur's catastrophic mismanagement. The animators realized that they needed to work for an actual film studio if they hoped to ever realize their idea of creating a computer animated movie. The lab was initially supposed to create a full-length 90-minute computer animated film called The Works. The film was supposed to take place in a distant future. A supercomputer triggers the next world war, which pretty much destroys humanity. After that, the computer decides to repopulate the Earth with robots. This brave project, however, got shelved due to a variety of reasons. The most advanced computers available for the lab in the 70s still did not have sufficient computing power to produce a feature film. Another important reason is George Lucas. Lucas realized the potential of CG animation, so he decided to start a computer animation department at his company Lucasfilm called Graphics Group. Lucasfilm was an actual film studio, so Lucas promised much better creative conditions and opportunities to animators than Schur ever could. One by one, animators who worked for Alexander Schur resigned and joined graphic groups instead. Ed Catmull and Elway Smith did so too. Catmull became the head of the newly founded computer division. Graphic groups began with creating CG animated sequences for movies. The studio created the Genesis effect sequence for the movie Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, which was the second feature movie in the Star Trek franchise. In 1985, the revolutionary stained glass night sequence for young Sherlock Holmes was created. In 1977, a businessman Nolan Bushnell created an animation studio called Kaleidoscope, which would make just one animated film called The Christmas That Almost Wasn't, before being sold to Lucasfilm in 1983. And merging with what would eventually become Pixar Animation Studios. The same year, John Lasseter, who was just fired from Disney for promoting computer animation, joined Pixar. At first, Lasseter was just a freelancer, but in 1984, he was offered to join the computer division of Lucasfilm as an interface designer. And since then, he had been an integral part of Pixar for many years. The name Pixar itself was conceived as a folk Spanish word meaning to make pictures. This is how originally a graphics computer developed by Graphics Group was called. Pixar's first animated film was a 2-minute short The Adventures of Andre and Wally B, released in 1984 and directed by Elway Ray Smith. In 1983, the last part of the Star Wars trilogy was released. It grossed significantly less money at the box office than two previous movies. After that, George Lucas was contemplating selling his computer division. Animators were rightfully afraid that it would prevent them from creating the first feature computer animated film, a dream that Catmull and others had cherished for over a decade. The best decision they could make was to become a completely independent company. This is precisely what happened in 1986, when Pixar, headed by Edwin Catmull, became an independent corporation. On February 5, 1986, Pixar was sold to Steve Jobs. This is when Pixar Animation Studios, we know it today, was born. In August the same year, John Lasseter's animated short Luxy Jr. was released. A lamp and a ball from that short would later become mascots and symbols of Pixar. Disney was very much interested in the technology that Pixar used to create the animation, the computer animation production system, or just CAPS. Disney would use this technology for their 1990 film Rescuers Down Under. In 1990, Pete Docter and Andrew Stanton joined Pixar. In 1991, Disney also became a distributor of Pixar movies. Two companies signed a deal. Disney was obliged to distribute at least one full-length film made by Pixar. The production of Toy Story, Pixar's first feature movie, had begun. Between 1986 and 1991, Pixar produced several animated short films, including Red's Dream, released in 1987, and Knick Knack, released in 1989. Both were directed by Lasseter. But starting in 1991, Pixar refocused all its attention and labor to making Toy Story. The production of short animation was temporarily halted. In 1995, more than 20 years after Ed Catmull and the others joined Computer Graphics Lab, the dream of countless animators finally came true. Toy Story was released on November 22 and became a huge international hit. With a moderate $30 million budget, for the sake of comparison, Disney's Pocahontas, released the same year in June, cost twice as much money. Pixar's debut grossed almost $400 million. It was a huge success and debut that Pixar could only dream of. On November 28, just days after Toy Story was released in North America, Pixar had an initial public offering. It was the largest IPO of the year. Just a year prior to the release of Toy Story, Steve Jobs was seriously contemplating selling the studio, because he was mostly losing money and was close to being disappointed in the project. However, Jobs was convinced that Toy Story would be a hit. The prediction aged like wine. Toy Story was nominated for the Best Original Song, Best Original Score, and Best Original Screenplay. It was the first time an animated movie got nominated for Original Screenplay. This success led to Disney and Pixar making an agreement in 1997 to jointly produce 5 movies in the next 10 years. Pixar's next project, A Bug's Life, a story of a young male ant named Flick who defends his colony and wants to win the hand of a princess. The movie was released in November 1998 and made over $360 million at the box office. However, the movie was released during a feud which erupted between Pixar and DreamWorks. In October 1998, DreamWorks released Ants, a movie with almost exactly the same premise as A Bug's Life. It became obvious that Jeffrey Katzenberg, a co-founder of DreamWorks, who left Disney in a bitter feud, stole the idea for A Bug's Life during one of his friendly meetings with John Lasseter. Pixar's second movie was financially successful, however, it wasn't exactly met with acclaim like Toy Story. Pixar's third film, Toy Story 2, was released in 1999. Originally it was supposed to go straight to home media, but the studio changed its decision. The movie went through some rework before hitting the big screens. This time Lasseter co-directed the movie with Ash Brennan and Lee Unkrich. Toy Story 2 proved that investment in a sequel was not in vain, for it grossed over $500 million. Absolutely fantastic success. Commercial success of the first 3 movies cemented Pixar's position as the most promising animation studio in the world. Symbolically, Toy Story 2 was released the same year as Disney's Tarzan, the last movie of Disney's Renaissance era. After Tarzan, Disney would be plunged into obscurity for the whole decade. The 2000s would become the era of computer animation. Not just Pixar's animation, but Pixar undoubtedly became a trendsetter. The roaring commercial success of Pixar movies allowed the company to build a new studio in Emeryville. Every new Pixar premiere was accompanied with a short film. Monsters, Inc. was released in November 2001 and grossed $579 million at the box office. Pete Docter debuted as a director. The movie was accompanied with a short film For the Birds. In 2003, Pixar for the first time released their movie in May and not in November. Finding Nemo, directed by Andrew Stanton, grossed $867 million and became the highest-grossing animated movie of all time, beating the seemingly unreachable record set by The Lion King a decade earlier. Brad Bird's Incredibles, released again in November in 2004, grossed $631 million, becoming the most expensive Pixar movie, with an estimated budget around $145 million. In the 90s and 2000s, Pixar developed a new work system, so-called Pixar Brain Trust. Writers, directors, and storyboard artists would regularly examine each other's work, discuss and express criticism. This led to a more open horizontal system, which greatly contrasted with more traditional Hollywood hierarchy, where directors only answer to studio executives. Later, the Brain Trust system would also be adopted by Walt Disney Animation Studios. The success of Pixar and later Disney Revival-era movies serves as proof that the open system works. In the early 2000s, there was a conflict between Steve Jobs and Michael Eisner, who was the Disney CEO at that time. The argument happened over revenue sharing, as Jobs thought that Disney takes too much credit for Pixar's works, when in reality Disney was only busy with marketing and distribution, while the whole creative process was strictly on Pixar's shoulders. This conflict even led to the change of release calendar. The November release was dictated by Disney. Starting with Cars in 2006, Pixar began, with only rare exceptions, releasing their movies in June. Summer release schedule had many advantages. Summer is a perfect time for blockbuster movies, and Pixar's films undoubtedly became box office blockbusters. Summer release was also great because it allowed Pixar to sell DVDs during the holiday season of each year. In 2005, Pixar's exhibition of original artwork called Pixar 20 Years of Animation opened at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. During the fallout between Pixar and Disney, Pixar was actively searching for partners to replace Disney. Warner Brothers spokesperson explicitly expressed a desire to work with Pixar, but negotiation ultimately led nowhere, and the studio failed to find other partners. In 2005, the relationship between the companies drastically changed, as Bob Iger became the CEO of Disney Company. May 5, 2006 is the date when Disney acquired Pixar. All previous distribution deals between them became irrelevant. According to Iger, the idea to acquire Pixar came to him during a parade at the opening of Hong Kong Disneyland, which happened in September of 2005. Both Disney characters that appeared were created 10 years ago, or even earlier, while the only characters created within the last 10 years were all by Pixar. Iger saw that Pixar almost completely replaced Disney as the dominant animation studio in the world. This is how he realized how important the acquisition of Pixar was. Buying Pixar ultimately proved to be a great step for Disney, as their own animation studio, which suffered from great crisis during the post-Renaissance era, had a lot to learn from their Pixar counterparts, and mainly working ethics. Above-mentioned Brain Trust was adopted by Disney. John Lasseter once again returned to Disney. He and Catmull were assigned to oversee the creative process within the Walt Disney Animation Studios. This led Disney out of the post-Renaissance era and into a new revival era that started in 2009 with The Princess and the Frog, but took its shape a year later with Tangled. Despite becoming a part of Disney, Lasseter insisted that Pixar remained a creatively separate entity from Disney's own studio, meaning that Pixar and Disney could not exchange animators, writers, ideas, and help each other out. Pixar continued to function practically as its own studio without, for the most part, corporate meddling from Disney. Even when Pixar had difficulties with Ratatouille and Disney with both, studios didn't come to each other's aid. To convey the spirit of Paris for Ratatouille, the director Brad Bird and the producer Brett Lewis took a 1-week trip to Paris and ate at 5 restaurants. Even though Ratatouille faced some challenges, the film became a big success, grossing over $600 million and receiving an Oscar in 2008. WALL-E is still regarded as one of the best animated movies ever created. A science-fictional story of two robots falling in love with each other won Pixar another Oscar. Up, released in 2009, became the very first animated feature to open the Cannes Film Festival in May of 2009. Throughout the 2000s, Pixar had been pushing the boundaries of storytelling in family-friendly animation. No other studio could tackle what Pixar could. Pixar's philosophy was, and still is, creating original and risky projects, even if it feels like it's not what audiences expect. Up is a story of an old man who lost his wife. He attaches balloons to his house and flies to South America to see legendary Paradise Falls in Venezuela. It was his wife's dream when she was still alive. The movie explored very mature things such as depression and infertility. In the 2000s, only Pixar out of all mainstream American animation studios could do this. However, Pixar's run wasn't perfect. Cars, released in 2006, was a commercially calculated move. The film itself didn't gross too much, but Disney and Pixar made tons of money off merchandise and especially toys. Cars had a way more juvenile story and humor to appeal to the youngest demographic possible, unlike more mature films like WALL-E and Up. Released in 2010, Toy Story 3 broke the record of Finding Nemo and became the highest grossing animated movie of all time, with box office over $1 billion, which placed the threequel in top 10 highest grossing movies of all time back then. Toy Story 3 also became the highest grossing movie of 2010, even ahead of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. In the 2010s, Pixar's strategy changed under the influence of its parent company. Sequels and prequels were a relatively easy way to make money, and the success of the Toy Story trilogy was the best proof possible. In the 2010s, we saw multiple continuations to Pixar movies. Cars 2 and 3 released in 2011 and 2017 respectively. Monsters University, released in 2013, was a prequel to Monsters Inc. Finding Dory, sequel to Finding Nemo. Before the decade came to an end, we received two more sequels, Incredibles 2 in 2011 and Toy Story 4 in 2019. The sequels weren't met with universal acclaim, but grossed a lot of money. Incredibles 2 became the highest grossing Pixar movie to date. Toy Story 4 even overtook the threequel, albeit by a very small margin. 2010s could be called the era of Pixar sequels, but the original movies didn't go anywhere, obviously. Brave, released in 2012 and directed by Disney's veteran Brenda Chapman, was mildly successful financially, but was a very important step towards more inclusivity. Merida became the first female lead character in Pixar history. Brave was indeed a brave story about defining social expectations and finding your true self. Brave looked like a Disney princess movie, but with Pixar's unique creative touch. In September of 2012, Disney re-released Finding Nemo in 3D format. Early 2010s were a period when Hollywood companies began converting some of their notorious movies in 3D. 2015 was the first year when Pixar released two new movies. Inside Out, premiered in June, was a huge box office hit and critical success. Inside Out can be considered Pixar's first masterpiece since Up in 2009. But on the other hand, The Good Dinosaur became the first Pixar movie that failed financially. The Good Dinosaur went through production storms. Bob Peterson, the director, and the studio couldn't agree on what the story should look like. As a result, in 2013, Peterson was fired and replaced by Peterson. But this movie didn't really help, as the story was still extremely undercooked when the movie was released in November of 2015. Most of Peterson's original ideas were scrapped. Initially, the movie was supposed to take place in the modern world. The Good Dinosaur is still regarded as the worst original Pixar movie. 2017 gifted us with Coco, another fascinating movie which explored unique Mexican traditions and culture. In 2018, Incredibles 2 premiered with a short film called Bao, directed by Canadian director Domi Shi, who became the first female director to direct a Pixar short film. The same year, John Lasseter stepped down as Pixar's chief creative officer due to sexual misconduct towards Pixar workers. He was replaced by Pete Docter. In August of 2018, Pixar began producing Spark Shorts, a series of independent animated shorts. On November 12, 2019, Disney launched its streaming service called Disney+. The last movie released before the coronavirus pandemic was Onward. The movie grossed only $142 million worldwide because of pandemic. Pixar was shut down for quarantine. The animators working on Pixar's next movie, Soul, had to finish the movie working from home. Because of the raging pandemic, Soul, one of the best cartoons of recent years, wasn't released in theaters and headed straight to Disney Plus in December 2020. In May 2020, a short LGBTQ film Out was released on Disney Plus. It featured LGBTQ characters for the first time in Pixar's entire history. The next three films after Onward, namely Soul, Luca and Turning Red, didn't see theatrical release in the US and Canada, and premiered direct on Disney+. Disney decided not to charge additional fees for watching these movies. Turning Red became another remarkable hallmark in Pixar history, as it was the first Pixar movie solely directed by a female director. This achievement again belongs to Domi Shi. Brenda Chapman's Brave was co-directed by Mark Andrews. Pixar returned to theaters in June 2020 with Lightyear, a highly anticipated spin-off of the Toy Story franchise. However, the return wasn't triumphant, as the movie failed at the box office, grossing only a meager $226 million. One of the reasons was that Lightyear was Pixar's first full-length movie to feature an openly LGBTQ character. Because of that, Lightyear wasn't released in several markets, including the MENA region and China. Disney refused to cut a same-sex kiss from the movie, after Disney workers protested in March 2022. However, this was not the only reason for the movie's failure. A lot of people got used to watching Pixar movies, and not only Pixar movies, on Disney+, and not in theaters. The window between theatrical release and release on streaming was too short, so a lot of people, especially parents with kids, chose to wait and see a new movie at home. After all, going to the theater is not exactly cheap, especially when you take your entire family. Plus, the movie wasn't particularly good, and didn't have great word of mouth. Unlike Pixar's next and currently final project, Elemental, Peter Sun's second project grossed only $30 million on a domestic opening weekend, which was a catastrophic result considering the film's budget of $200 million. However, thanks to great word of mouth, Elemental grossed $154 million domestically and almost $500 million worldwide. In 2024, Pixar was supposed to release Elio, an original science fiction story by Adrian Molina, who previously wrote the screenplay for Coco. However, due to SAG-AFTRA strike, Elio got postponed to 2025, and in June 2024, we're gonna see the sequel to Inside Out. In February 2023, Bob Iger announced Toy Story 5, but there's still not many details about this movie, and it's uncertain when it will be out. Pixar Studio went through several periods and gave us some of the best animated movies that have ever been created, and the studio will undoubtedly bring us more great stories in the future. This was a very brief history of Pixar Animation Studios.